In 52 BCE, the most brilliant military commander in history made a decision that defied all logic. Julius Caesar ordered 50,000 Roman soldiers to build their own tomb. They would trap themselves between 80,000 enemies inside a fortress and 300,000 more approaching from outside. Think about that for a moment. 50,000 Romans voluntarily trapped between 380,000 enemies. No escape route, no possibility of retreat. Just walls they built with their own hands, sealing themselves between two massive armies that wanted nothing more than to see every last Roman dead. The fate of Western civilization hung on one impossible gamble. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the greatest military genius in history chose to bury his entire army alive, and how this suicidal strategy created the most dominant empire the world has ever seen. I'm going to reveal 3 things that will change how you see ancient warfare forever. First, the secret engineering marvel that turned a death trap into a killing machine. Second, the moment Caesar personally saved his army from complete annihilation. And third, how one surrendering chieftain's pride changed European history forever. But here's what doesn't make sense. Why would any commander trap his own retreat route? What engineering secret allowed 50,000 men to hold against 380,000? How did Caesar know Vercingetorix would surrender before his own men starved? How do you even feed 50,000 men while they're building 2 massive walls? How did the Romans fight in 2 directions simultaneously without losing their minds? And what personal vendetta drove Caesar to risk absolutely everything at this hilltop fortress in Gaul? To understand this insanity, I need to show you the impossible situation Caesar had created for himself. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of history's most decisive battles, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war content. Ring the bell to never miss another tale of impossible military victories. Now, let me take you back to Gaul, where Caesar was about to rewrite the rules of warfare forever. Gaul in 52 BCE was a powder keg waiting to explode. For 6 years, Julius Caesar had been conquering tribe after tribe, claiming victory after victory. But conquest isn't the same as control, and the Gallic tribes were reaching their breaking point. Enter Vercingetorix, a name that would echo through history. This wasn't just another tribal chief. The Arverni prince had done something no Gallic leader had managed before. He united the impossible. Over 40 tribes that had been fighting each other for generations suddenly stood together under one banner. Think about that. Ancient enemies putting aside blood feuds to face a common threat. Caesar's situation was more precarious than most people realize. 6 years of conquest meant nothing if he couldn't hold it. Back in Rome, his political enemies were circling like vultures. The moment he showed weakness, the moment he failed, they'd strip him of his command. Without his legions, without his victories, Caesar would face exile or death. This wasn't just about glory, it was about survival. The Gallic Confederation represented something unprecedented. We're talking about warriors from the Atlantic coast to the Rhine, from the Mediterranean to the English Channel. Different languages, different gods, different ways of fighting, all united by one thing: hatred of Rome. For the first time in history, Gaul spoke with one voice, and that voice was calling for Roman blood. But here's where Caesar's genius becomes terrifying. When his scouts reported on Alesia, any reasonable commander would have looked for another target. The fortress sat on a plateau, surrounded by rivers and valleys. Natural defenses made it nearly impregnable. The high ground gave defenders every advantage. Attacking it was madness. Yet Caesar saw something others missed. Vercingetorix had made Alesia his stronghold, gathering 80,000 of his best warriors behind its walls. The Gallic leader thought he was safe, thought Caesar would never dare attack such a position. That overconfidence would prove fatal. The power dynamics were fascinating. Romans were the occupiers, the invaders who'd brought their laws and their eagles to free Gaul. But they were also the representatives of civilization, of order against chaos. The Gauls were freedom fighters, defending their homeland, but also warriors who practiced human sacrifice and collected enemy heads as trophies. Caesar needed this victory. Not wanted, needed. His entire career, His life, his place in history, depended on breaking Gallic resistance once and for all. Failure meant returning to Rome in chains. Success meant immortality. Vercingetorix needed this victory too. His people's independence, their way of life, their very identity as free Gauls hung in the balance. He'd united the tribes through strength and charisma, but that unity was fragile. One major defeat and it would shatter like glass. The geography of Alesia would become crucial. 2 rivers flanked the plateau. Hills surrounded the approaches. Any assault would have to climb steep slopes under missile fire. The fortress itself was a masterwork of Gallic engineering, with walls that had never been breached. But geography cuts both ways. Those same features that made Alesia impregnable also made it a trap. Once inside, Vercingetorix's army would need supplies. Those 80,000 warriors needed food, water, fodder for their horses. The fortress that protected them could also become their prison. When Caesar's scouts first saw Alesia's walls, they should have retreated. Instead, Caesar commanded 10 legions of Rome's finest soldiers. Not conscripts or militia. These were professionals who'd been fighting in Gaul for years. Each legion numbered around 5,000 men, equipped with standardized gear that made them the most efficient killing machines in the ancient world. The gladius, the scutum, the pilum weapons that conquered the known world. But here's the insane part nobody talks about. Caesar also had 10,000 Germanic cavalry. These weren't Romans, they were mercenaries from beyond the Rhine, warriors Rome had been fighting just years before. Wild horsemen who collected scalps and fought nearly naked, now riding alongside disciplined legionaries. That's the kind of pragmatism that made Caesar dangerous. His inner circle read like a who's who of Roman history. Labienus, his second in command, a tactical genius in his own right. Mark Antony, young and hungry for glory, commanding his first major independent force, and strangest of all, Marcus Brutus, fighting loyally beside the man he'd one day assassinate. Imagine that irony. Caesar teaching his future killer how to win impossible battles. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix commanded 80,000 Gallic warriors, but calling them an army misses the reality. This was a confederation of tribal warbands, each with different equipment, different fighting styles, different levels of discipline. Noble cavalry in mail armor fought alongside half-naked berserkers. Some carried fine Celtic swords, others made do with farming tools turned weapons. What happened next defied all military logic. Vercingetorix sent messengers to every corner of Gaul. The greatest hosting in Gallic history was called. Every tribe that could send warriors was commanded to march to Alesia's relief. The Confederation demanded 250,000 men, and incredibly, the tribes answered. The tactical geography became everyone's obsession. The rivers, the Oise and Osserane meant cavalry couldn't easily maneuver. The hills, Mont Auxois, Mont Rhea, Mont Penevel, created natural kill zones but also blind spots. Every commander studied approach routes, calculating where to attack, where to defend. Then Caesar gave an order that made his own generals think he'd gone mad. Instead of assaulting Alesia, instead of starving them out from a safe distance, he ordered something unprecedented. His legions would build walls. Not just any walls, a complete encirclement of the entire plateau. 11 miles of fortifications, trapping Vercingetorix inside. But Vercingetorix had made one critical miscalculation. He'd brought too many men into Alesia. 80,000 warriors consumed supplies at a staggering rate. Every day of siege meant hundreds of cattle slaughtered, tons of grain consumed, thousands of gallons of water needed. The fortress he'd chosen for its strength was already becoming a trap. The pre-battle maneuvers revealed both commanders' brilliance. Vercingetorix ordered scorched earth tactics, burning farms and poisoning wells to deny Caesar supplies. But Caesar's Germanic cavalry proved their worth, ranging far and wide to secure food. Small skirmishes erupted daily as foraging parties clashed. The first major cavalry battle outside Alesia's walls showed what was coming. 3,000 Gallic horsemen charged Caesar's positions. The legionaries formed squares, presenting walls of shields and protruding pila. But it was the Germanic cavalry that won the day. sweeping around the Gallic flanks with savage efficiency. The psychological impact was immediate. If Gallic cavalry couldn't win on open ground, what hope did they have? Roman supplies were running dangerously low. Feeding 50,000 men plus 10,000 cavalry and their horses required massive logistics. Every day of construction meant less food for the siege. Caesar was racing against time to finish the fortifications before starvation weakened his army. The psychological warfare had already begun. Gauls lined Alesia's walls, shouting insults and displaying their numbers. They wanted Romans to see how many enemies waited inside. But Roman discipline held. Day after day they dug and built, ignoring the taunts. Here's where Vercingetorix made his fatal error. He kept his entire force inside Alesia, instead of leaving a garrison and taking his field army elsewhere. Pride, perhaps, or confidence that the relief force would arrive soon. Either way, he'd trapped himself as surely as Caesar was trapping him. As September began, Caesar's engineers started something never before attempted in warfare. Days 1 through 3 saw Roman efficiency at its finest. The circumvallation, the inner wall surrounding Alesia, began taking shape with frightening speed. 11 miles of fortifications sounds impossible, but Caesar's legions were as much construction crew as fighting force. Every soldier knew how to dig, how to build, how to fortify. They'd done it hundreds of times across Gaul. But this wasn't just digging ditches while safe in camp. Gallic arrows rained down constantly. Warriors sortied from Alesia's gates, trying to disrupt construction. Roman soldiers worked with shields propped against missile fire, digging with one hand while keeping weapons close with the other. Imagine trying to build a wall while people are actively trying to kill you. The engineering specifics reveal Caesar's genius. This wasn't just a simple palisade. The Romans dug 2 ditches, each 15 feet wide and deep. The inner ditch they flooded where possible, creating a moat. Behind these came the rampart, proper 12 feet high, topped with battlement and towers every 80 feet. That's approximately 350 towers along the entire circumvallation. Days 4 through 7 brought Vercingetorix's attempted breakouts. He couldn't let Caesar complete the encirclement. Massive assaults hit the incomplete sections. 30,000 Gauls charged Roman positions, desperate to break through before the trap closed. But the legions held, fighting with disciplined rotation while construction continued behind them. That's when Caesar received intelligence that changed everything. Scouts reported massive movement across Gaul. The relief army wasn't just coming, it was going to be bigger than anyone imagined. Conservative estimates put it at 250,000. Some reports claimed 300,000. Caesar faced a terrible choice: abandon the siege or do something insane. He chose insanity. Caesar ordered the construction of a second line of fortifications, the contravallation facing outward. His army would build another wall, 14 miles long, turning their position into a fortress within a fortress. They would trap themselves between Alesia and the relief army. The engineering details of these fortifications border on obsessive. Beyond the ditches and ramparts, Caesar ordered obstacles that would make charging impossible. The gravestones, Sippi, were logs with sharpened branches projecting outward at eye level. Charging cavalry or running infantry would impale themselves. But Caesar had one more engineering trick that would turn defense into slaughter. The lilies. Lilia were pits 3 feet deep with sharpened stakes at the bottom, concealed by brush. Thousands of these death traps dotted the approaches. In front of everything they scattered spurs, stimuli-foot-long iron spikes hammered into the ground at angles. Like ancient landmines, invisible until too late. Days 8 through 14 became a desperate race. The relief army was confirmed, approaching dust clouds on the horizon, refugee reports of endless columns marching. Caesar's men worked day and night. Sleep became a luxury. Exhausted legionaries collapsed at their posts, were revived, and continued digging. The Germanic cavalry fought constant skirmishes, buying time. These wild horsemen became Caesar's eyes and ears, ranging miles from the fortifications. They brought back disturbing news. The relief army included contingents from every major Gallic tribe. This wasn't just an army, it was a nation in arms. Food shortage began affecting both sides. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix put his men on reduced rations. Outside, Caesar's supplies dwindled daily. The mathematics were brutal. 50,000 Romans plus 10,000 cavalry meant 60,000 mouths to feed. Even with Germanic foraging, starvation loomed. Then something happened that nobody expected. Caesar's own men began to doubt. Centurions reported murmurs in the ranks. Soldiers understood courage, understood fighting against odds. But voluntarily trapping themselves, building their own prison? Some wondered if their commander had finally gone too far. Caesar responded with typical brilliance. He toured the fortifications personally, speaking to work crews, praising their efforts, explaining his vision. "We're not trapping ourselves," he told them. "We're creating a killing ground where Roman discipline will slaughter Gallic courage." The murmurs stopped. The first outer wall attacks came on day 12. Advanced elements of the relief army, probably scouts testing defenses, hit the contravallation. Just probing attacks, but they revealed the challenge ahead. Romans would need to fight in two directions simultaneously, something no army had ever attempted at this scale. Soldier testimonies from this period, preserved in later accounts, speak of bone-deep fear mixed with strange pride. They were attempting the impossible, building something that would be studied for centuries. One legionary supposedly said, "We're either building our monument or our tomb. Either way, they'll remember us." What the Romans did next was pure, calculated brilliantly. They pre-positioned reserves between the walls, created rapid response protocols, established signal systems using flags and horns. Every contingency was planned. When the storm broke, every man would know his role. On September 20th, as the relief army's dust clouds appeared on the horizon, every Roman knew they had just built their own grave. Dawn of the first day revealed the full magnitude of Caesar's gamble. The relief army spread across the horizon like a dark ocean. 250,000 Gauls. Some reports claimed 300,000, arranged in tribal contingents. The Romans were now outnumbered 7-1, trapped between hammer and anvil. Commius of the Atrebates led the first assault on the outer walls. 40,000 warriors charged the western section, screaming war cries that echoed off the hills. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix coordinated his attack, sending his men against the inner fortifications. For the first time in history, an army fought a siege in two directions simultaneously. The Roman response demonstrated why they conquered the world. Pre-positioned sentries wheeled into place with mechanical precision. The tower fighting began immediately. Gauls with ladders and grappling hooks trying to scale walls, while Romans stabbed down with pila. But the prepared defences proved their worth. Charging Gauls hit the concealed lily pits, men screaming as sharpened stakes punched through their feet. The stimuli claimed hundreds more, iron spikes tearing through sandals and flesh. But here's where Caesar's madness became genius. The gravestones, those sharpened logs, channeled attacking forces into kill zones. Gauls couldn't charge straight, they had to weave between obstacles. This gave Roman artillery scorpions and ballistae clear targets. Imagine trying to dodge giant arrows while navigating a maze of death traps. The sensory overload was total. Screams came from both directions. Vercingetorix's warriors hitting the inner walls, the relief army assaulting the outer fortifications. Arrows fell like deadly rain, so thick soldiers said the sky darkened. The clash of iron on wood, gladius on shield, created a constant thunder that deafened men for days afterward. By midday, the northwest section was in crisis. Vercingetorix, the Arverni commander, and Vercingetorix's cousin, had identified a weak point where the fortifications crossed difficult terrain. He led 60,000 picked warriors against this single section. The Romans there, 2 legions, roughly 10,000, men faced 6-1 odds. Caesar watched from his command position, purple cloak visible to all. He had to make an impossible choice: reinforce the northwest and risk other sections breaking, or trust his men to hold against overwhelming numbers. This is the moment when Caesar earned his legend. He sent only 6,000 reinforcements. just enough to stabilize, not enough to weaken other sectors. The fighting reached inhuman intensity. Romans fought in shifts, fresh sentries rotating in as exhausted men stumbled back. But there were only so many fresh troops. By late afternoon, some sentries had rotated 3 times. Men fought on despite wounds that would normally sideline them. There was nowhere to retreat to. Statistical shock. The Romans were firing 100,000 arrows per hour at peak battle. Every archer had pre-positioned bundles. Slingers added their lead bullets to the storm. The killing ground between obstacles and walls became carpeted with bodies. Wounded Gauls couldn't retreat through the press of men behind them. They died where they fell. Night brought no relief. Gauls lit torches, continuing their assaults in the darkness. Romans fought by feel and sound, stabbing at shapes looming out of blackness. The confusion was total. Friend and foe mingled in the darkness. Men killed their own comrades by mistake. Officers lost control of their units. Only the walls themselves maintained any sense of order. Then physics itself seemed to favor the Romans. The lily pits, invisible in darkness, claimed thousands. Gauls carrying torches made perfect targets for Roman missiles. The stimuli, those iron spikes, were impossible to spot at night. Attacking formations disintegrated as men tried to help wounded comrades. Dawn of Day 2 revealed the carnage. Bodies piled 10 feet high in some sections. The wounded and dying carpeted the ground between walls. But the relief army was far from broken. Fresh contingents moved forward, stepping over their dead comrades. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix prepared for his all-or-nothing assault. This is where honor met pragmatism, and pragmatism won. Caesar received reports that Labienus's section was about to break. 6 cohorts had been fighting for 20 straight hours. The general himself was wounded, still fighting in the front rank. Without immediate reinforcement, the entire northern section would collapse. Simultaneously, Mark Antony's position came under massive assault. The future triumvir faced 40,000 Gauls with just 6,000 exhausted Romans. Messages begged for reinforcement. Cannot hold much longer. Caesar faced every commander's nightmare 2 crisis points, insufficient reserves to address both. But then something occurred that nobody, not even Caesar, expected. The Germanic cavalry, held in reserve between the walls, took matters into their own hands. Their chieftain, whose name history sadly doesn't record, saw the crisis and acted. Without orders, 4,000 horsemen charged out a rear gate, riding hard around the entire battle to hit the Gauls attacking Labienus from behind. Caesar made his choice. Taking his last reserve, just 13 cohorts, about 6,000 men, he split them. Half went to Antony, half followed him personally to Labienus. But here's the detail that changes everything. Caesar didn't just send reinforcements, he led them himself, purple cloak streaming, clearly visible to every Roman on the walls. The psychological impact was instant. Exhausted legionaries who could barely lift their shields suddenly found new strength. Caesar comes. The cry spread along the walls faster than any messenger. Men who'd been fighting for a day and a night prepared for one more effort. What happened in the next 60 seconds decided Western civilization. 3 forces converged on the northwest section simultaneously. Labienus's exhausted men held the wall. Caesar's reinforcements hit from inside. The Germanic cavalry smashed into the Gallic rear. Caught between 3 forces, pressed against their own obstacles, the Gauls had nowhere to go. The slaughter was absolute. Unable to retreat through the press of their own men, unable to advance through Roman steel, the Gauls died where they stood. The Germanic cavalry, in their element now, cut down fleeing warriors with savage efficiency. These weren't Roman citizens bound by rules. They were paid to kill, and they earned their gold that day. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watched his cousin's force disintegrate. He'd launched his own assault, sending every available warrior against the inner walls. For a brief moment, it seemed like the interior might break even as the exterior held. Gallic warriors actually breached the inner wall in 3 places. This is when things went from desperate to impossible. Caesar, still visible in his purple cloak, led a charge that military historians still study. Leaving subordinates to handle the outer battle, he raced to the inner wall. The sight of their commander, personally leading reinforcements, turned the tide. Romans, who'd been falling back, suddenly stood firm. But the Gauls had one advantage Caesar couldn't counter: desperation. They knew this was their last chance. Warriors threw themselves on Roman spears to create gaps for their comrades. Noble cavalry dismounted, preferring to die on foot rather than flee. The fighting reached a crescendo of violence that survivors could barely describe. Then came the moment that would haunt survivors forever. The relief army's main force seeing the northwest attack fail, seeing thousands of their best warriors trapped and dying broke. Not a gradual retreat, not a fighting withdrawal. They simply turned and ran. 200,000 men, fleeing the field, abandoning their trapped comrades. Inside Alesia, from the walls, Vercingetorix saw it happen. The relief army he'd summoned, the force that was supposed to save Gaul, running. His assault on the inner walls faltered as word spread. Warriors who'd been ready to die suddenly lost heart. The greatest army Gaul had ever assembled was melting away like morning mist. Caesar seized the moment. Fresh Germanic cavalry pursued the fleeing Gauls for miles, cutting down stragglers. Roman infantry sorted from the fortifications, adding to the slaughter. What started as a battle became a rout, then a massacre. The killing continued until exhaustion, not mercy, stopped it. As the sun set on the second day, 50,000 Romans had done the impossible, but what happened next would echo through history. Dawn of the third day brought an eerie silence. No war cries, no assault preparations. From Alesia's highest tower, a white flag appeared. After witnessing the relief army's abandonment, after losing thousands of his best warriors, Vercingetorix had called his final council. The Gallic chieftains faced a bitter choice: continue fighting and face starvation, or surrender and hope for terms. Some advocated fighting to the death. Others, more pragmatic, pointed out their families were also trapped in Alesia. The debate raged through the night, but Vercingetorix himself ended it with characteristic nobility. "I united Gaul to fight for freedom," he reportedly said. "I won't let it die for my pride." He would surrender personally, taking full responsibility, hoping Caesar might spare the others. It was the decision of a true leader, sacrificing himself for his people. The statistics tell their own brutal story. In just 2 days of fighting, 40,000 Gauls lay dead between the walls. Thousands more died in the pursuit. Roman casualties, while serious, were remarkably light for such a battle. 12,000 wounded, 5,000 dead. The lily pits alone had killed more enemies than many entire battles. The surrender ceremony became legendary. Vercingetorix donned his finest armor, his best weapons, his most decorated horse. He rode out from Alesia's gates alone, approaching Caesar's command position. In full view of both armies, he circled Caesar's chair, once a final moment of Gallic pride, then dismounted and laid his arms at the Romans' feet. Caesar, ever the showman, remained seated throughout. The symbolism was deliberate and crushing, the greatest Gallic warrior submitting to a seated Roman. The man who'd united 40 tribes kneeling before the representative of Roman order. In that moment, independent Gaul died forever. The practical aftermath began immediately. 80,000 warriors filed out of Alesia, laying down their weapons in massive piles. Roman quartermasters catalogued everything: swords, spears, shields, armor. The logistics of disarming so many took 3 full days. Each tribe's warriors were separated, counted, processed like livestock. Here's the detail that changes how you see the entire battle. Caesar's treatment of prisoners depended entirely on politics. Aedui and Arverni warriors from tribes Rome needed as allies were released to return home, but 40,000 others weren't so fortunate. They were distributed among Caesar's legions as slaves, payment for years of hard campaigning. The letters Caesar sent to Rome painted him as the savior of civilization. Gaul was pacified. The barbarian threat ended. Roman values triumphant. Falsla, falslasi, Of course, he didn't mention that he'd created the crisis by invading Gaul in the first place. Victory has a way of rewriting history. The soldier celebrations mixed exhausted relief with grim satisfaction. Wine flowed freely. Caesar ensured that men who'd fought for 2 straight days could barely stay awake to enjoy their victory. They'd done the impossible, and they knew it. Veterans would bore their grandchildren with stories of Alesia for decades. But the cost of victory would haunt Caesar forever. The engineering marvel of Alesia became a template for Roman siege warfare, studied and replicated for centuries. But it also represented something darker. The moment Celtic Gaul died, an entire civilization's independence ended between those walls. Among the captives, Vercingetorix received special treatment. Caesar couldn't simply execute such a valuable prisoner. The Gallic leader would be kept alive, imprisoned, but well-treated, saved for Caesar's eventual triumph in Rome. For 6 years, Vercingetorix would remain in Roman custody, a living trophy of Caesar's greatest victory. The political implications rippled immediately. In Rome, Caesar's enemies were silenced. How could they criticize a general who'd defeated 300,000 enemies with 50,000 men? The Senate voted Thanksgiving celebrations. Caesar's command in Gaul was secure. More importantly, his reputation had become unassailable. But there were grim realities too. Other Gallic resistance leaders weren't as fortunate as Vercingetorix. Mass crucifixions lined the roads, Caesar's message to any thinking of future rebellion. The Romans could be merciful to those who submitted, merciless to those who resisted. Alesia taught both lessons perfectly. Personal aftermaths varied. Brutus had proven himself in combat, earning Caesar's increased trust ironic given future events. Mark Antony emerged as a commander to watch, his desperate defense becoming legendary. Labienus confirmed his reputation as Caesar's most reliable subordinate. The fate of Vercingetorix deserves special mention. 6 years later, during Caesar's triumph in Rome, the Gallic chief was paraded through the streets, then ritually strangled in the Tullianum prison. His death marked the final act of Alesia's tragedy, a brave leader who'd united his people, only to see them crushed by Roman efficiency. Caesar had won more than a battle. He had written a manual for conquering the impossible, but the true cost of Alesia would only become clear with time. The immediate consequence of Alesia was Gaul's complete submission. Within months, the last pockets of resistance crumbled. Tribes that had fought Romans for generations suddenly accepted Roman law, Roman taxes, Roman civilization. The transformation happened with stunning speed within a generation. Gallic nobles were sending their sons to study in Rome. The death toll reflection sobers any celebration. The Gallic wars cost an estimated 1 million lives, with another 1 million enslaved. Entire tribes essentially ceased to exist. Alesia marked the endpoint of this cultural genocide. The moment organized Gallic resistance died, independent Celtic culture, which had dominated Europe for centuries, began its fade into memory. But Alesia's impact extended far beyond Gaul. Caesar's double wall technique revolutionized siege warfare forever. Military engineers studied his fortifications for centuries. Napoleon himself visited Alesia's site, trying to understand Caesar's genius. Even today, military academies analyze the battle as the perfect example of turning defensive warfare into offensive victory. Politically, Alesia cleared Caesar's path to civil war. His enemies in Rome couldn't touch him now. Who arrests a general who'd conquered Gaul? The wealth from Gallic slaves and plunder made Caesar richer than some kingdoms. The loyalty of his veterans, forged in moments like Alesia, would follow him across the Rubicon. The engineering legacy established Roman fortification doctrine for centuries. Every Roman siege afterward reflected Alesia's lessons. Double walls, lily pits, obstacles creating kill zones, these became standard practice. Roman military manuals preserved Caesar's exact specifications, turning his desperate innovation into systematic doctrine. Culturally, Alesia accelerated the Romanization of Western Europe. Latin spread through Gaul within decades. Roman roads followed Roman victories. Gallic gods acquired Roman names. The civilization that emerged, Gallo-Roman culture, would shape France, parts of Germany, Switzerland, and Belgium forever. Here's the philosophical heart of Alesia. When is risking everything the only rational choice? Caesar faced political destruction if he failed in Gaul. So he chose the insane option trap himself between two armies, because normal strategies wouldn't achieve total victory. Sometimes the craziest plan is the only sane one. Modern military thinking still reflects Alesia. When facing superior numbers, create advantages through preparation and terrain. Force enemies to fight on your terms. Turn defensive positions into offensive weapons. Make the enemy's strength irrelevant through superior positioning. Every Special Forces unit studying defensive warfare learns Alesia's lessons. But Caesar's gamble vindicated more than military theory. Fortune favors the bold became more than a saying. Alesia proved it true. By choosing the impossible, by refusing to accept limitations, Caesar demonstrated that audacity could overcome arithmetic. 50,000 disciplined men could defeat 380,000 brave ones. The historical pivot can't be overstated. Without Alesia, no secure Roman Gaul. Without Roman Gaul, no buffer against Germanic tribes. Without that buffer, Rome falls centuries earlier. No Roman stability means no preservation of classical knowledge through the Dark Ages. Western civilization's trajectory fundamentally altered on those September days in 52 BCE. Caesar buried 50,000 men alive, and in doing so, gave birth to an empire that would last 1,000 years. Sometimes the most insane strategies create the most lasting victories. Alesia reminds us that when faced with impossible odds, the answer isn't to retreat, it's to make the impossible possible through preparation, discipline, and sheer audacity.